She slid the deed across her dining table and capped her pen, the way some people close a Bible. Keep it in the family. Della, it is what Sam would have wanted. 11 years I had kept that family's land records. Straight, every boundary, every lien, every quiet mistake. Nobody thanked me for fixing. Here is what she did not know that morning. The 80 acres she was so proud to take had a dead gas well buried in it, and a state cleanup order with the Hale name already on it. I signed. I kept one strip of gravel along the road that nobody in that room wanted. Today, people pay me to read the land before they buy it. I am a certified title abstractor, and I find the things that are buried. Last spring, I finally read, out loud, exactly what the Hales had fought me for. Then, I let them keep every poisoned acre of it. Lawfully, to the dollar. My name is Della Voss. I am 41 years old. And if you have ever been the one who kept a whole family running and got counted as nothing while you did it, stay with me. The smallest, ugliest piece of dirt in that entire valley was about to become the only thing in it worth owning. Welcome to Still Water Stories, where I tell quiet, true-shaped stories about ordinary women who keep their dignity when the people who married them, or the people they married into, decide to turn. No shouting, no schemes. Just a woman who knows precisely what a thing is worth. Even when an entire town has agreed she is worth nothing. If that is the kind of story you came here for, subscribe and stay close, because this one sat in a folder for 2 years before I could say it without my hands going cold. Let me take you back to the dining room, because that is where you need to stand to understand the rest. It was a Tuesday in March, 10 in the morning, and Eleanor Hale had set the table like it was Easter. Good cloth. The cups with the gold rims. A plate of lemon bars. Nobody touched. Her son Marcus sat to her right, with his arms folded over his chest. The way a man sits when he has already decided he is owed something. His wife, Caroline, sat beside him in a coat she had not taken off, like she might need to leave quickly to go measure curtains. And across from me, with a leather folder and a fountain pen, and a smile he had practiced, sat Royce Hale, who happened to be a lawyer and happened to be Eleanor's nephew, which told me everything I needed to know about whose idea this meeting really was. On the table between us were 2 documents and a survey map. One document gave the 80 acres they called the Bottoms to Marcus. The other left me the narrow strip along the county road that the family had always called the lane. 3 acres of weeds, a gravel pull-off, an old spring house, and a water line that nobody had thought about in 30 years. Eleanor did the talking, the way she always did the talking. She has a voice, like a hand on your shoulder. In church, the Bottoms is Hale ground, she said. Tom worked it. Sam grew up on it. It should stay with a Hale. She let that sit. You'll keep the lane. Of course. The frontage. That is only right. She said only right. The way other people say I forgive you generously while taking the thing out of your hands. I want you to notice that nobody in that room asked me a single question about either parcel. Not one. They had a survey map sitting right there in front of them, and not one of them turned it over. They were so sure they were taking the gold that it never crossed their minds to check the assay. If you have ever sat at a table where everyone else thinks they are smarter than you already know the particular quiet I was keeping. Royce slid the deed toward me. My attorney that day was a woman named Gloria Boone, 63 years old, dry as a creek bed in August. and she had told me in the parking lot exactly what to do, which was almost nothing. Before I touched the pen, Gloria said evenly, for the record, that she strongly advised all parties to obtain an independent title examination of both parcels before signing anything. Given the age of the chain, Royce waved his hand. Eleanor smiled. Marcus actually laughed. A short one. "We don't need a stranger to tell us about our own land," he said. "That sentence is the reason I sleep fine." At night, they were offered the truth. They turned it down with a laugh. So, I signed. I gave away the bottoms with a steady hand. I kept the lane. Caroline made a sound that I will be polite and call a sigh of relief, and she reached over and squeezed Marcus's knee. And Eleanor said, "There, wasn't that easy? Now we're whole again." And I picked up my copy of the deed and the survey map they had not bothered to read, and I drove 4 blocks to my office on the square and locked the door and let myself cry exactly once, alone, in the cab of my truck, for about 90 seconds. And then I stopped, because it was the last time. Crying was going to be useful to me. After that, I was going to need my hands. Stay with me, because everything you just watched me lose is the trap. I just had not finished building it yet. Although, to be fair to me, I had not built it at all. They had. I had only kept the receipts. Let me tell you how I ended up keeping a family's receipts. In the first place, I married into the Hales at 26. Sam Hale was the second son. The easy one. The one who could fix a baler and make a room laugh, and never once in his life raised his voice at me. He drove a propane route across 3 counties and came home smelling like cold air. I loved him in the plain, unglamorous way you love a person you actually plan to be old with. We had a daughter, Junie, who is 12 now and has her father's stubborn jaw. And we had a small house in town. And for a long time that was enough. Tom Hale was Sam's father, and Tom was the one who pulled me into the land. Tom had been the county surveyor for 30 years before he retired, a tall, slow man who set iron pins along boundary lines by hand, and never once, in all the years I knew him, lost an argument about where a property line ran. He kept a worn leather field book in the truck, soft as a glove, full of his own blocky handwriting, and little hand-drawn boundaries. The first time he showed it to me, I was a brand new bride, who happened to mention I had passed my title examiner's exam. And Tom looked at me the way most of that family never did, which is to say, he looked at me like I was useful. He set that field book in my lap at his kitchen table, and said the thing I have carried ever since. "Della," he said, "people are always going to hand you a map, pretty paper, clean lines. But the map is just what somebody hoped was true. You walk the line before you trust the map. You go find the pin in the ground. Walk the line before you trust the map." I have repeated that sentence to myself so many times, it has worn smooth. Like the brass survey pin he gave me that same afternoon, the one that has sat on my desk as a paperweight for 15 years. At the time, I thought he was talking about surveying. He was talking about everything. I did not understand, back then, why one man would care that much about a piece of iron in the dirt. A pin is just a pin. I learned why later, from his old surveying partner, in the worst stretch of all of this. And when you hear the reason it is going to change the shape of every careful thing Tom Hale ever did, hold that thought. A man does not become the most exact person in a county for no reason. He becomes it because something taught him the cost of being careless. Once, when he was too young to recover from it, gracefully. I will give you that story when it lands the hardest. For now, just know the brass pin on my desk is not a keepsake. It is a warning somebody handed me with love. 15 years before I understood, it was a warning. And so I became the Hale family's keeper of records, unpaid and unthanked. For 11 years. I am a title abstractor. I read the chain of ownership on a piece of land, deed by deed, going back a century if I have to. And I tell you what is real and what is buried. It is a slow, patient, deeply unglamorous skill. And it turns out a family farm generates an enormous amount of work nobody else wants to do. I caught a tax parcel error one year that would have cost Tom the back over $40 in unpaid assessment from before he was born. I cleared a clouded title on Marcus's first house for free on a weekend when a forgotten lien from a dead uncle nearly blew up his closing. I did the easement work when the township wanted to run a sewer line. I did all of it the way you do things for family, which is to say I did it and said nothing and assumed it counted for something. It counted for nothing. That is the part that took me 11 years to learn. Here is how I learned it. Sam died on a Thursday in October, on his propane route, on a county road 8 miles from the house. His heart. He was 43. There was no warning, no long goodbye. Nothing for me to fix or audit or prepare for. One morning, he kissed the top of Junie's head. And the next time I saw him, he was already gone. I am not going to spend this story inside that grief, because grief is not the point, and Sam would have hated being used for a point. I will only tell you that for about 3 weeks afterward, I was not a title examiner, or a businesswoman, or anything at all. I was just a widow with a 12-year-old and a casserole problem. And it was inside those 3 weeks, while I was at my softest, that Eleanor Hale began. She did not start with a demand. People like Eleanor never start with a demand. She started with a hand on my arm at the funeral, and the words, "We need to talk about the land when you are ready, just so it stays right." She started with concern. That is the thing about the calm ones. They do not come at you with a fist. They come at you with a casserole and a worried face and a plan they have already finished making. Here is the part Eleanor was counting on me not understanding, except I understood it perfectly, which is the one advantage of marrying a surveyor's son and reading deeds for a living. Sam and I owned that homestead. Tom had deeded the whole place to Sam years before he died. And Sam had left everything to me, plainly, legally. There was a will. It was clean. I had drafted the property descriptions in it myself. The Hale family land, the bottoms and the lane both, was mine, free and clear. The day Sam's heart stopped, Eleanor had no claim on a single blade of grass out there. Neither did Marcus. And here is the thing I should have read as a warning years before, and didn't. Because grief and trust make you a bad reader of the people closest to you. This was not the first time Eleanor had tried to move that land. When Tom died, 4 years before Sam, there had been a quiet skirmish that I let myself forget. At the kitchen table after the funeral, Eleanor had floated, in that gentle, worried way of hers, that it only made sense for the working ground to go to Marcus, the son who actually farmed rather than to Sam, who drove a propane truck and would probably just let it go to weeds. She had pieces moving before the casseroles were cold, and she was stopped by exactly one thing. She was stopped because Tom Hale, being Tom Hale, had already deeded the homestead to Sam years earlier and recorded it, with the county seal crimped right into the paper. There was nothing to discuss. The record had already remembered. I watched Eleanor take that in across the table, smooth her face back into place, smile, and let it go. And I made the single dumbest mistake of my marriage, which was to believe she had actually let it go. She had not let go of anything. She had only put it in a drawer in her head and closed it. The way some people close a Bible, and waited for the one person standing between her and that land to stop breathing. 4 years later, he did what they had, instead of a claim, was a town, and that, it turned out, was almost enough. Within a month, the story had set like concrete. I heard it secondhand, the way you always do. I had married in, and now I was carrying off hale ground. I was the outsider, the cold one. The bookkeeper type who had probably been planning this all along. Eleanor never said any of that directly. You understand, Eleanor had a gift. The rarest and most useful gift a quiet villain can have. She let other people draw the cruelest conclusion. So her own hands stayed clean. She would sigh in the church kitchen and say, I just worry the land won't stay in the family now. And let 11 women fill in the rest. Within 6 weeks, a man I had done a title search for at cost crossed the street. Rather than say hello to me, a woman whose mother's estate I had personally untangled for nothing, stopped sitting near me at Junie's volleyball games. If you have ever been the most competent person in a room and watched people decide that your competence was proof, you must be the one in the wrong. Then you know the specific loneliness I am describing. They cannot picture the careful woman as the victim. They look at the one who is good with paperwork, and they simply cannot imagine her being robbed. So they don't. They just quietly wonder what she did to deserve it. Type the word counted in the comments if you have ever been her. Because I promise you, she is reading this too. And she needs to know she is not the only one out there. I did not correct any of them. I want to be honest about that, because it matters. I could have walked into that church kitchen and laid the will on the counter, and the deed beside it, and made every one of them feel small. I didn't. Gloria, my attorney, told me something early that I held onto like a railing. Save it for the room where it counts. She said, you explain yourself to gossip. You've already agreed to be judged by gossip. Don't. So I stayed quiet, and I let them believe what they believed. And in the meantime, I did the only thing I have ever truly known how to do when my life stops making sense. I started reading the records. Now, here is where I need you to lean in. Because this is where the whole story turns, and a half-listening person could miss it. The Hales wanted the bottoms, the 80 acres, the good open ground. The part that looked like money, the lane, the skinny strip along the road. They handed me like a consolation prize. Everyone in that family, and everyone in that town, agreed on the value of those 2 pieces of land. Big piece, valuable. Little piece, worthless. They were wrong. They were wrong in both directions. And they were wrong because not one of them had walked the line. They had trusted the map. I pulled the full title chain on both parcels myself, the way I would for any paying client, because at that point I did not yet know what they were planning. Only that they were planning something. And a person who reads land for a living does not wait to be surprised. And buried in the record on the bottoms, going back almost 40 years, I found a well. I want you to understand how a thing like that hides in plain sight, because it tells you everything about why the careful person sees what the loud person never will. It was not hidden. Exactly. Nothing in a public record is hidden. It was just boring and buried under decades of ordinary paper. And you had to read every page in order to reach it, and nobody in that family had ever read a deed all the way through in their lives. I went page by page. A right-of-way grant from 1961, a mineral lease from 1978 to an operator called Cardinal Gas and Oil, a little outfit out of 2 counties over, a release here, an assignment there, the slow paper breathing of a piece of ground over a lifetime, and then, in the file, a drilling permit. Cardinal had put a shallow gas well in the northeast corner of the Bottoms in the spring of 1979. And for a few years it had made a little gas and a little money, and then it had made neither, and then Cardinal Gas and Oil had done what those little outfits always did when the money stopped. It dissolved. It filed its dissolution papers, paid its last fee, and ceased to exist, and it left the well in the ground, unplugged, leaking a little into the soil and the air. An orphan with no parent left alive, to make pay for it, not a water well, a gas well. Back in the early days, before Tom even owned the place, an operator had drilled a shallow gas well in the northeast corner of the Bottoms. And then, the way those small operators did, had simply walked away from it when it stopped paying. The company dissolved. The well was never properly plugged. It just sat out there in the weeds, an orphan, leaking a little, for decades, with nobody legally on the hook, until the state finally went looking for somebody to make pay for it. And under the law in our state, when an operator vanishes, the obligation to plug and remediate an abandoned well falls to the owner of the surface, the owner of the dirt, whoever holds the deed. The State Environmental Department had issued a formal plugging and remediation order on that well 3 years earlier, and when nobody acted on it, they had recorded a lien against the Bottoms to secure the cost. The lien was filed at $46,000. And here is a number I want you to actually hear, because it is the kind of number people skim past. And skimming past it is exactly what Marcus Hale did. That lien accrued interest at 9% a year. $46,000 at 9% is $4,140 every single year. It had been sitting and growing for 3 years. 4,140 times 3 is 12,420. Which means that on the morning Marcus folded his arms and demanded the Bottoms. The recorded debt strapped to that land was not $46,000. It was $58,420. And the actual job, the plugging and the remediation the state was demanding, was estimated at another $62,000 on top of that. That is roughly $120,000 of obligation, sitting on a piece of land they had all agreed was worth about $190,000 as bare pasture, except it was not worth $190,000 as bare pasture because of the second thing I found. The Bottoms was landlocked. The only legal access to those 80 acres, the only recorded right-of-way that connected that ground to a public road, ran straight across the lane, the skinny, worthless strip. Tom Hale himself had drawn that easement decades ago, by hand, in the field book that was sitting in my office, and recorded it at the county. Whoever owned the Bottoms could not legally reach the Bottoms, could not sell it, could not lease it, could not drive a single truck onto it without crossing the lane. And the lane was the piece they were so generously leaving to me. I sat in my office with the green-shaded desk lamp on, and the chain of title spread out in front of me, and I felt something move through me that was not anger. I have learned to be suspicious of anger. What I felt was clarity, cold, clean, total clarity. They were not fighting me for an asset. They were fighting me hard for a hole in the ground that was going to swallow whoever fell in it. And the only ladder out of that hole was the 3 acres of weeds they were handing me with a pat on the head. I did not make the trap. I want to be very clear about that. The same way I was careful in that dining room. I did not dig that well. I did not record that lien. I did not draw that easement. I did not landlock that ground. Other people did all of that, over 40 years, with their own hands. All I did was read it. The most dangerous thing in the world to a person who is lying to your face is a person who simply read the file. Now, I told you there was one person who listened to me through all of this without trying to fix me. And there was. Her name is Margie Dunn, and she has been the county recorder of deeds for 41 years. She is the one who stamps the official seal into certified copies, the heavy embosser that crimps the county's mark into the paper so a document becomes a thing. A court will believe. Margie has known me since I was a bride asking dumb questions at her counter. And Margie does not gossip, which in our town is practically a superpower. The afternoon I came in to pull the certified copies of everything. The lien, the plat, the easement, the chain. She watched me work for a while in silence. And she knew, the way the old ones always know, that something was wrong in my life. She did not ask me about Sam. She did not tell me it would be okay. She just slid the certified copies across the counter, still warm from the seal, and she looked at me over her glasses and said the thing I have repeated to myself 100 times since. Records don't argue, honey, she said. They just outlast the liar. Then she went back to her stamping. That was the whole conversation. It was enough. Some people fix you with a sentence and have no idea. They did it. I left her counter with a folder thick as a phone book and a thing in my chest I had not felt in months. Not hope. Exactly. Something steadier than hope. The feeling of standing on ground that would hold. Let me tell you what the next 4 months were like. Quickly, because they were not the point, and I refuse to make you live them slowly. The town stayed cold. The casseroles tapered off, and the cold shoulders did not. Gloria filed nothing, because there was nothing to file. Because nobody had taken anything yet. I kept my office open. On the square, I did the work that paid, title searches for the bank, an easement dispute. A quiet title action for a man buying his late mother's house. I kept Junie's life nailed to the floor, on purpose. Same school, same volleyball practice, same dinner at 6, same lamp, left on in the hallway every single night. Because a child who has lost her father does not also need to lose the shape of her days. There were nights I sat at the kitchen table at 2 a.m, with Tom's field book open, and my husband's name in my mouth, and wondered whether being right was going to be worth what being right cost. Then the sun would come up, and I would braid Junie's hair and open the office and do it again. That was the rebuild. It was not loud. It rarely is. There was one night in those months that nearly cracked me, and I am going to tell it to you, because if you have ever held a child steady while your own legs were going out from under you, you already know this floor. Junie came home from school one afternoon and was quiet through dinner in a way that was not her. And at bedtime, she sat up against her pillow and asked me, in the small, careful voice kids use when they have heard something they were not supposed to hear, whether it was true that we had stolen the farm. A girl in her grade had said it on the bus. Said the Voss family stole Hale land. Said her grandma said so. Said we were going to get found out. 12 years old. Asking her mother if her mother was a thief. I knelt down by her bed so we were eye to eye. The way Tom used to get down to talk to a fence corner, I did not say one word against the Hales. Not Eleanor, not Marcus, not any of them. Because I had decided early that whatever those people did to me, my daughter was never going to hear me tear down half of where she came from. But I made her a promise, a specific one, and I picked my words like I was drafting a deed, because I was. I said, "Baby, listen to me, because this is the truest thing I know how to tell you. I read land for a living. I know exactly what is ours and exactly what is not. Down to the inch, on paper, with the county's own seal on it. Nobody is taking our name off of anything that is ours, and anybody who says different just never learned how to read." She looked at me for a long moment, with her father's stubborn jaw. Deciding whether to believe me, then she nodded once and lay down. I turned off her light and stood in the hallway in the dark for a while, and I did not cry, because I had spent my one cry already, and I was not going to borrow against the next one. But I made myself a second promise out there in the hall. The one that actually mattered. Whatever it took when this was over. That child was going to watch her mother be proven right out loud. In a room that counted, by paper that did not lie. I just had to keep my hands steady long enough to get her there. And the whole time, in a locked drawer. The folder waited. I knew they would come for the land formally. Eventually. Because Eleanor does not start a thing she does not intend to finish. The only question was how. It was in those waiting weeks that I finally learned why Tom Hale was the way he was, and it steadied me more than any document could have. His old surveying partner, a man named Cliff Renner, 80-some, and bent, like a question mark, showed up at my office one gray afternoon with 2 coffees and sat down across from the brass pin without asking. Cliff was the one soul in that whole orbit who never believed a word of Eleanor's story. And he had come, he said, because Tom would have skinned him if he sat by while they did to me what they were doing. Then, he told me the thing nobody had ever told me. When Tom was 19, the Hales lost the original home place. Not all of it, 40 acres. And the old barn, they lost it to a neighbor. And they lost it for one reason. For 3 generations, the 2 families had farmed along a fence line that everybody knew. A line their grandfathers had agreed to, with a handshake and a jug. And never once written down. No survey, no recorded line. Just a fence and a friendship and 50 years of everyone knowing. And then the neighbor died, and the neighbor's son sold to a stranger, and the stranger brought in a surveyor who pulled the actual deeded line out of the courthouse. And the real line ran 200 feet inside, what the Hales had worked since before Tom was born. The barn stood on the wrong side of it, and there was nothing. Not one sheet of recorded paper anywhere on this earth that proved the old agreement had ever existed. The handshake was gone. The day the hands that shook it were in the ground. The Hales lost the 40 acres and the barn, and Cliff said he watched young Tom stand in the courthouse hallway and watch his own father sign the corrected deed with a hand that would not stop shaking. Your daddy-in-law decided something that day. Cliff told me, turning his coffee in his hands. He decided he was going to be the man who set the pins and recorded the lines, so that no Hale ever again lost ground to the absence of paper. He used to say it to me out in the field, drove me half crazy with it. Cliff looked up at me then. He'd say, "A handshake forgets, Cliff, but a record remembers. A handshake forgets, a record remembers." I sat there with that sentence and felt the whole architecture of the man settle into place. The iron pins, the field book, the recorded easement, the deed he filed to protect Sam, the rule he handed a brand new bride at his kitchen table. None of it was fussiness. All of it was a scar. Tom had been teaching me, for 15 years, how to survive the exact thing that was now happening to me. And he had done it so quietly. I had mistaken the lesson for a quirk. I was not facing the Hales alone. I was facing them with a dead surveyor's entire life standing behind me, crimped into paper, waiting. Cliff finished his coffee and stood up to go, and at the door he stopped and said one more thing. He always told me you were the only one of them who actually read what he wrote. Then he left, and I sat with the pen in my hand until the light went out of the window. And when I got up, I was not afraid anymore. Or not only afraid, I was ready. And about 5 months after the funeral, Royce Hale called my office and asked, in his smoothest voice, whether we might all sit down as a family and settle the land question so everyone can move forward. A family settlement, he called it, a kindness. I told him I would be there. Here is the decision I made before I walked into Eleanor's dining room. And it is the decision the whole rest of my life turned on. I was not going to fight them for the bottoms. I was going to give it to them. All 80 acres, with the dead well and the recorded lien and the landlocked silence, and every poisoned thing attached to it. I was going to hand over with a steady hand and a sad face, and I was going to keep the lane, because the bottoms was a trap they had built for themselves, and then begged me to let them walk into. And the one thing I was not going to do ever was talk them out of it. Gloria walked me through it 3 separate times, because I am a woman who distrusts a plan that sounds too good. And this one sounded too good. You give up the marital pasture they want, which is underwater, she said. You keep the separate frontage, which is solid, and you say almost nothing. Then she added the one thing that kept it all clean. The thing I made her promise we would do out loud, on the record, no matter what. You owe them no warning. Della, the lien is public. The plat is public. The easement is public. Royce is a lawyer. They have every tool you have, but you are going to recommend, on the record, that they get an independent title search. Every party, both parcels, before anyone signs. And when they say no, and they will say no, that no belongs to them forever. That is the difference between a trap and a con. I did not deceive a soul. I offered them the truth in front of witnesses, and they laughed it off the table. I will not pretend I was calm the night before, walking into a room planning to sign away 80 acres of the land your husband grew up on, while a whole town stands ready to call you the thief. Who carried off Hale ground is a strange and lonely kind of brave. I sat at my kitchen table past midnight with Tom's field book open to the page where his blocky hand had drawn the lane and the easement and written, in the margin, the line and the date, decades before any of this. My whole defense, drawn by a dead man who had been burned once and sworn his family never would be again. Junie was asleep, down the hall. I read those margins until the words stopped being words. And I rehearsed the one thing I actually had to do the next morning, which was nothing. Say nothing. Sign with a steady hand. Let them win the argument, so they could lose the war. The hardest part of the whole plan, the only part that took real nerve, was keeping my mouth shut while people I had served for 11 years laughed at me for losing. I practiced the flat, polite face in the dark. By the time the sun came up, I was not afraid. I had a folder and a pen and a man's whole careful life standing behind me. And I was ready to go give the Hales exactly what they had come to take. Because here is what I had built in that folder, and I want you to see it the way I saw it. Because it is the most beautiful thing a careful person ever makes. I built it the way you build a wall, one certified brick at a time. every brick stamped, every brick a thing a court would have to respect. Margie sealed each one. Across her counter, the certified plat showing the recorded easement running across the lane, the only legal road to the Bottoms, drawn in Tom's hand and filed at the county. The drilling permit for the Cardinal. Well, the dissolution papers, proving Cardinal no longer existed to be chased. The plugging and remediation order from the state. The recorded lien with its dates and its 9%. The full chain of title on both parcels. Every deed, every assignment, every release. Going back to before Sam was born. And under all of it, Tom's field book, the original, the handwriting that matched the recorded plat exactly. The thread running unbroken from a dead surveyor's thumb to my desk. Not one piece of it was a secret. Not one stolen text. Not one recording made in the dark. Not one thing. I was not entitled to pull with $3. And a clear afternoon. Every page was institutional, public, official, the kind of paper a clerk stamps, and a judge believes. Tom's entire philosophy, stacked in one folder thick as a phone book. Waiting for the morning, the loud people would sign their names to a thing they had refused to read. You already watched that part. You watched Marcus laugh. You watched me sign. Now let me show you the file opening, page by page, because the signing was only the first move. The deeds, recorded. The next morning, Margie sealed them herself. The Bottoms went into Marcus Hale's name, free and clear in his mind. His, at last, the lane, stayed mine. And then the records, which do not argue, began to do the only thing records do, which is outlast everyone who lied. It took about 6 weeks for the first letter to reach Marcus, because that is how long the state takes to update an ownership record and send its notices to a new surface owner. The letter informed him that he, as the recorded owner of the parcel known as the Bottoms, was now the responsible party for an outstanding plugging and remediation order on an abandoned gas well in the northeast corner, and that a recorded lien in the amount of $58,420 and growing was attached to his land, and that the state expected a remediation plan. Within 90 days, I did not send that letter. The state sent that letter. I just knew, to the day, almost, when it would land. The second thing happened when Marcus, who had grand plans for the Bottoms, a cattle lease he had been bragging about, tried to actually do something with his 80 acres and discovered he could not get a truck onto them. The lease fell through in a single phone call when the cattleman's own people pulled the title and found the parcel had no legal road access except across a strip of frontage owned by Marcus's widowed sister-in-law, the one the family had so generously left, holding the weeds. That is when Caroline came to find me. I want to give Caroline her one honest moment. Because she had one. She caught me in the grocery store parking lot on a gray afternoon, both of us reaching for the same cart corral. No graceful way to avoid it, and for a second, with no audience, she let the performance drop. She looked older than she was, and tired around the eyes. "You think we're the villains," she said, not unkindly. I didn't answer. She loaded her bags, and then, almost to herself, she said, "You don't know what it is to be the branch of a family that never gets anything. To watch the good son get the good ground, and your husband get the leftovers, year after year." And for one breath, I did see her. I have seen that fear in clients. The panic of a person who runs the math on their own life and comes up short. For one breath, I almost felt sorry for her. Then she straightened up and slid back into the roll like a coat, and the softness was gone. And she said, with a small, cold smile, It doesn't matter. The bottoms will finally make us somebody. In this town. We'll figure out your little road. Your little road. She had stood in my home the week Sam died, eaten my food, and decided which of my things would look good in her version of the future. Whatever sympathy I had folded itself up and went quiet. People can be frightened and cruel at the same time. Caroline was choosing the cruelty, with her eyes open. I let her keep the choice. I wheeled my cart to my truck and drove home and made Junie spaghetti and did not think about Caroline again for a long time. Then came the part I had braced for. The part where the calm villain stops being calm. Marcus came to my office. He brought Eleanor. They sat in the 2 chairs across my desk, the brass survey pin sitting between us. And at first, Marcus tried to be reasonable, which on Marcus is a costume that never fits. He wanted me to grant him a permanent access easement across the lane. For free. As a family. And he wanted me to take the bottoms back, to undo the deed, because, he said, there had clearly been a mistake. I did not raise my voice. I have never once raised my voice at a hail. And I was not going to start in my own office. I told him the truth in numbered pieces. The way you lay tools on a bench, so that even a man who does not read his own paperwork could follow it. 1. There was no mistake. The deeds were exactly what every party asked for. And signed. 2. Before anyone signed, every party in that room was advised, on the record, by my attorney, to obtain an independent title examination of both parcels, and every party declined. 3. Wedis. The plugging order, the lien, the easement, and the landlocked status of the bottoms were all matters of public record. On the day they chose the bottoms, available to Royce, who is a lawyer, with the same $3, and the same 10 minutes it would take anyone. 4. How I was under no legal obligation to volunteer what they refused to go and read. And 5. I was not going to grant a free easement across my land, and I was not going to take back 80 acres of someone else's cleanup obligation. And there was nothing further to discuss. That is when Eleanor came apart. I had known that woman for 15 years, and I had never once seen the church voice fail her. Not at a funeral, not at a wedding. Not at the worst of the gossip. It failed her in my office. She stood up before Marcus could stop her, and the sweet, lowered, hand on your shoulder voice was gone, replaced by something raw I almost did not recognize. She told me I had stolen from the family. She told me I had always been an outsider, a cold thing that married her boy for the land. She told me Sam would be ashamed, and the terrible part, the part that I think she heard herself say and could not take back, was that she turned on Marcus right there in front of me and told him he was a fool who had never read a thing in his life, that he had cost the family the bottoms, and saddled himself with a debt no Hale could carry, and that he had done it by laughing in the one meeting where laughing cost him everything. I sat perfectly still through all of it. I did not gloat. I did not say a word, because there was nothing left for me to say that the records had not already said better. With a county seal crimped into them, when they finally left, I locked the door behind them, and I did not cry, because I had already used my one cry on the day I signed. In my truck, when crying still made sense. This was not a day for it. This was a day for quiet. Now, here is where a lesser story would let me off the hook with luck, and I refuse. Because my father-in-law spent 15 years teaching me that luck is just the name lazy people give to other people's preparation. Nothing in what happened next was luck. It was all the system working exactly as written, on a record that did not argue. Marcus filed a complaint against me. He went to the state licensing board for title professionals, and he accused me of fraud, of concealing a known defect, of using my expertise to cheat my own family. And I want to tell you, that was the only stretch of this whole thing that frightened me, because my license is my whole life. It is the name on my glass door. It is how I feed Junie, but it frightened me for exactly as long as it took the board to do its work, which is to say not very long, because the record protected me, the way Tom always promised the record would, and the board's written finding, which I keep a copy of in the same folder as everything else, said it plainly. It found no misrepresentation, no concealment, and no breach of duty. It noted specifically that all parties had been advised on the record to obtain independent title examinations and had declined, that I owed no fiduciary duty to a represented adverse party in an arm's-length family settlement, and that every fact in question had been a matter of public record, equally available to the complainant. An institution, in writing, with its own seal, found that I had done nothing wrong. They will not hand you a thing like that. You have to earn it by being right on paper, every single day, for years before you ever need it. I had been. Tom made sure of that before I was old enough to know why. And the bottoms. The bottoms did what underwater ground does. Marcus could not pay the lien, and could not afford the remediation, and could not reach the land to make a dime off it. The state moved to enforce. The 80 acres went to a public lien sale on the courthouse steps on a cold Tuesday morning. And I will tell you what happened at that sale, because it is the closest thing to a verdict this story has. Nobody bid. Not one person. Oti had Ewan. 80 acres of open ground in a county where land moves. And the auctioneer stood on those steps and called for an opening bid 3 times and got silence. Because every buyer in that county had done the one thing the Hales never did, which is read the file before reaching for the prize. A landlocked parcel with a 6-figure cleanup order attached is not an asset. It is an anchor. With a deed, the bottoms reverted to the obligation. And Marcus's name stayed on the lien. And the debt kept growing at 9%, while he stood there and watched. And the town, slowly, did its own arithmetic. This is the part people never believe until they have lived in a small place long enough to see it happen. Eleanor Hale had run her whole campaign through the church kitchen and the women's circle on a story about an outsider stealing Hale ground. But records are public, and a lien sale on the courthouse steps is public, and a man who cannot reach his own 80 acres becomes, eventually, a known thing. The story rotted from the inside, the way a story does when the facts underneath it finally surface. People who had crossed the street to avoid me started, instead, doing the slower math about which woman in this picture had actually been telling the truth. The casseroles that used to flow toward Eleanor's table thinned. The pew beside her at church had a little more room in it. On Sunday than it used to. Nobody made a scene. Nobody apologized to me. The town just quietly revised its verdict, the way it always does in the end, because people are not stupid forever. And a small place has a long memory and a sharp eventual sense of who was actually in the wrong. Caroline did exactly what I expected her to do, which was leave. The bottoms was never going to make Marcus somebody. It was going to make him the man tied to a growing debt on ground he could not sell. And Caroline had spent her whole adult life afraid of being attached to exactly that kind of man. She had told me herself, in a parking lot, that her great fear was ending up as the branch of the family that never got anything. She walked straight into that fear with her eyes open, chose it, helped build it, and then could not stand to live inside it. Within the year, she and Marcus were finished. Her terror became her own doing, exactly as I had suspected. It would the afternoon she smiled and told me the Bottoms would finally make them somebody. It did not make her somebody. It made her gone. He left voicemails for a while. After that, Eleanor sent 2 long emails, both of them about family and forgiveness, and not one word in either of them that was an apology. I did not answer any of it. There is a particular kind of silence you choose on purpose, and it is a completely different thing from the silence that is forced on you. For 5 months, I had kept silent because nobody would believe me. Now, I kept silent because there was nothing they could offer me that I wanted. The records had already said everything. I just had to stop picking up the phone. The lane is the piece they laughed at. So let me tell you what the lane was actually worth. Because this is the number that made the whole valley go quiet for a while. About a year after the signing, a regional produce distributor began buying frontage along the new interchange road. The one the highway department had finally finished. The one that ran right along the edge of my 3 weedy acres. They needed road frontage for a cold storage facility, and the lane was precisely the frontage they needed. With the access and the old spring water rights already attached, they paid $68,000 an acre. The lane is 3.2 acres. $68,000 times 3.2 acres is $217,600 for the strip of gravel that Eleanor Hale handed me across her good tablecloth, like she was doing me a favor. I did not gloat about that either, although I will admit to you, here, just between us, that I sat in my truck in the recorder's parking lot the day that deal recorded, and I did not cry, but I did sit there for a while with my hand around Tom's brass pin, and I felt the man himself somewhere close, saying it again. You walk the line before you trust the map. They trusted the map. I walked the line. That was the entire difference between us, and it was worth $217,600. And a clean name. I want to refuse you the ending the movies would give you. Because it would be a lie. I did not get the family back. There was no tearful reconciliation on a porch. Eleanor and I do not speak. Marcus and I do not speak. The Bottoms is still out there, still landlocked, still leaking quietly into a debt that is somebody else's now. I did not win the town all the way back either, although small towns have long memories and a slow, eventual sense of who is actually in the wrong. And over the next 2 years, the people who had crossed the street started drifting back to my counter. A little sheepish, with title work that needed doing, and I took them on without one word about any of it. A grudge is just a debt you agreed to carry. I decided not to carry that one. What I got was smaller than a reconciliation, and truer than one. I got my name, still on the glass door downtown, a little brighter than it used to be, because I finally had the lettering redone with the produce money. I got my license, with a written finding behind it that says, in an institution's own hand, that I told the truth. I got a paid-off house on the good side of town, bought with traceable money that was always, every dollar of it, mine. And I got Junie, who is 14 now and asked me last spring to teach her how to read a deed. And I am teaching her at the kitchen table, with Tom's field book open between us, his blocky handwriting still keeping its lines after all these years. And there is one more salvaged thread, the one I did not expect. Cliff Renner, Tom's old surveying partner, the one who had sat across from my brass pin in the worst of it and told me why Tom was the way he was, never drifted away after the dust settled. He kept coming around. And the day the produce deal recorded, he showed up at my office one more time. And this time, he set something on my desk next to the pin. Tom's old surveying compass. The brass one, worn smooth at the hinge, from 50 years of a dead man's thumb. He'd want the tools where the reading actually gets done, Cliff said. And that was all. We have lunch every few weeks now. He tells me things about my husband, as a boy, that I would never have known otherwise. That is the family I kept, the one that was about the truth and not about the table. Eleanor Hale once stood in her own dining room and told me to keep it in the family. She said it like a leash and a blessing at the same time. Keep it in the family. I think about that line more than I should because of how it turned out. I did keep it in the family. I kept the one thing in that whole valley that was ever actually worth keeping. And I kept it in my family. The small, true one. The one with my daughter and my husband's good memory. And an old surveyor's 2 brass tools on my desk. I kept my name. And my name kept everything it was ever attached to. And the family that fought me, the loud one. The one so sure it was taking the gold. Got to keep exactly what it fought so hard to win. 80 acres of poison and a debt that grows by $4,140 every year. On ground they still cannot legally reach. Tom used to say the loudest person at the table almost always owns the least. He was right about that table. He was right about most tables. Here is the only thing I learned in all of it that I think is worth handing to you. Walking out of a room with less in your hands does not mean you walked out with less. Not if what is left is finally, completely, provably yours. A record does not shout. It does not argue. It just sits there with a seal crimped into it, patient as a pin in the ground, outlasting every single person who lied to your face. Keep your own records. Keep your own name. Walk your own line before you trust anybody's map. That is my story. One sentence. A dying surveyor said to a brand new bribe. One field book full of careful handwriting. One folder of certified truth. And a table full of people who fought and won and never read what they were winning. If this reminded you that quiet and documented will beat loud and certain every time, take it as a sign and go put your own house in order. Pull your own deed. Read your own paperwork. Keep your own name on the glass. And if you know a woman who is being counted as nothing by people who lean on her for everything, send this to her tonight, because she needs to hear that the careful ones are not the ones who lose in the end. Subscribe so the next story does not slip past you. And I will see you in the next one.